All right, hello everyone, and welcome to Potz N Around. Before we begin, I want to remind everyone to please hold their questions until the end of the presentation. You can write your questions in either the Q&A or the chat box. At the end of the presentation, I'll check in both places and I'll read those questions out loud. Our speaker tonight is Janet Scholes from the Master Gardeners of Bergen County. Janet spent 40 years in the industry, retiring as a wholesale manager of a local garden center. Her own garden has been listed in the Garden Conservancy's Open Days directory. Tonight, she'll be teaching us the art of container gardening and how to be successful with whatever you choose to plant in your pots or containers. So without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Janet.
Thank you. Now I just have to get my program up and running so we can see what we're doing here. No, I have to share my screen first. Do you have a thing for me to? Yes, I can share screen. And I need to go to here. Okay, I should have had this up and running before we started, and I was okay. Share. Okay, so slideshow from. Oh, and you're in the way here. Slideshow. From the beginning. Sorry, I should have had that up and running while we were talking. Okay. Well, program tonight, Potz N Around, is hopefully I'll be able to help you be successful with growing containers successfully. Anything goes. You can plant in shoes, you can plant in wheelbarrows, you can plant in containers, you can plant, size matters, okay? So make sure that you select a pot of the proper size. Why anyone would want to grow a rose in such a little pot? They would never be able to leave their house because they'd have to water it at least twice a day. I'm going to move this over here. So think about that. Also think about maybe color coordinating. My front door, for instance, this is a terracotta pot, which happens to be one of my favorite colors. So the terracotta pot has same color plants as that are in my front door. And this greets people early spring. This is not going to last all summer because pansies, for instance, and daffodils are wonderful to greet people in the spring early. But once the heat comes, they're not going to be happy. They're going to go to sleep. So you have to buy a more reliable annual that will bloom during the summer months. So some people like all their ducks in a row, and others 3 is company rather than have just one. And if you'll notice, it's not 3 pots, it's 2 pots and an object, but it creates the corner of 3. Window boxes. This window box, for instance, has individual pots of geraniums and that look like ranunculus. Once the, I'm sorry, I'm saying geraniums and I mean daffodils. Daffodils and ranunculus. Once the flowers are finished, they're removed and then it's replanted for the rest of the summer. Now, window box pair. I particularly like this particular setup. Not crazy about the color, but I have to say a thriller, a filler, and a spiller. You can't go wrong if you use that concept when doing that. But now when you don't want to block a window, I think this woman was extremely innovative. She used some twigs that she had sprayed, but she can see through them. But it adds height and drama. So the thriller, the filler, her red geraniums, and the spiller, it softens the edge. On the other hand, you can do a box just of all the same item. You don't have to mix and match. You can grow veggies or salads in a container as long as you have the right light. And window boxes, think about when you have to water them. If it's not convenient to, get a hose up there. This friend of mine has to carry the water up the stairs, open the window, and pour the window boxes. Too much work. So think about that. And decorate your window boxes for the various holidays. It doesn't have to be anything except just greens that are cut down, some wild berries, and it's so much nicer to look at a window box that has something in it rather than an empty window box for the winter. The same way with your containers. If you want to greet neighbors or friends during the winter near the door, this is a ceramic pot. It's not on soil. It's sitting on slate. And inside is another pot that's plastic, and that's what has the soil in it. So that when the soil freezes and expands, it does not break the pot. I'm not a purist. I spray paint a lot. So these are Astilbe flowers that had been spray painted. And I decorate all of my containers for the winter time. Hold on. Janice?
Hold on, what?
You have to be quiet, please.
What?
I'm giving it, you have to go away. Oh, I'm sorry. My daughter is here. So groups of 3, okay? So it's a very nice to repeat. You can have 1, but when you group things together, it makes a much stronger impact. Here we have Phormium, which is a sun-loving plant, Argyratum. So we have the thriller, and we have the filler, and the spiller hasn't quite gotten there yet, but it will. So here we have a container of mixed material, and here we have a container with just 1 item in it. So you can do whatever it is that you want to do. I'll tell you how to be successful in growing it as we go along. This is just to give you some ideas. There are absolutely no rules when it comes to what you can plant. These troughs. The trough is a plantable container that is a mixture of peat moss, perlite, and cement. It allows you to grow things. You have complete control of the soil. It's very porous, so it drains well. It allows you to grow alpine plants, for instance, which will get lost in a different container. So winter hardy is tufa or cement. The glazed pots that you get are not reliably winter hardy. So be extremely careful when you buy your pots. So this is an empty bird bath that cracked, and I planted in it. And to have a garden, you need different heights, different colors, and different textures. That's what makes a garden. So here we have actually a small garden in a container. Calladiums, for those of you who like calladiums, they're probably available in the store May 1st, May 15th. Do not plant calladiums outside until at least June 1. Calladiums do not want to be cold. And if they do get cold, they may not die, but they just won't grow. So think about calladiums. Here we have 2 containers flanking, very formal, okay? And this in the front here is boxwood that's been cut to look like a container. You can have your container spill out over onto the ground. That adds more drama to it. So here we have a container with nasturtium, and nasturtium planted in the lower pot and planted on the ground. It just adds drama to the garden. Some like it hot, depends upon your colors. The Coleus. Years ago, Coleus were bred, one of the few plants that you could grow in the shade. Well, be careful when you shop for your Coleus now, because they now have sun Coleus and shade Coleus. So you don't want to put shade Coleus in the sun. They may not perform as well, although I have not had a problem with it. And the large plant in the back, let me go back one, the large plant in the back, this is called a Canna. Cannas, they're pricey, but you can save them by digging them up at the end of the season. Let the frost kill the leaves. When the frost has killed the leaves, you dig up the tuber, bring it in your basement. If you have an apartment, if you have a little storage area someplace, wrap it in a newspaper with some peat moss, and then the following year, you can have it all over again. If you're lucky enough to have a swimming pool, grasses next to the swimming pool give a feeling of tropical, and they do not bloom that the bees will not be coming. So rather than putting flowers next to the pool that draw bees, you can put grasses next to the pool. Now, talking about Coleus, this is one container of one plant of Coleus that has sported. When a plant sports, the mother plant is one color, and for whatever reason, it starts to produce side shoots that are of different colors. So Coleus is a great plant for the sun, for the shade. It's not the flowers that you're looking for, it's the leaves. The leaves are what make it important. For spillers, you can use sweet potato vine. Sweet potato vine comes from an actual sweet potato, but if you dig it up to save it, write on it with a marking pen. I do not believe that they're edible, possibly, but I would not chance it. And now there are so many varieties to choose from. So sweet potato vine is a great spiller. It must have sun. So you're going to be able to choose, you need to choose. Do you have sunny area or do you have a shady area? Passion vine, there are vines that will grow, and you can grow it in a container. And then you bring the container into a protected area for the winter, garage or basement. Plectranthus. Plectranthus is a form, many different forms of Plectranthus. It's called Swedish ivy. It likes the shade, and yellow in the shade, even though it's just leaves, is very colorful. Doesn't have to have flowers to be colorful. English ivy can be made into a topiary, or it can be made into a spiral. It just takes a lot of work, a lot of time, and a lot of effort. So you have to decide, how much time do you want to spend doing that? Do you just want to give it water every few days, or do you want to really work with something? And when you're finished with all of this here, you can stack your pots in the back and make a pot mat. So let's talk about the potting essentials. You have to determine where you're going to place your container. Is it in the sun or is it in the shade? It should be a minimum of 8 to 10 inches. I would suggest 14 to 16 inches, because the smaller the pot, the more frequently you're going to have to water, and you don't want to be a slave to your pots. All pots must have a drain hole in the bottom. And if you put it down on concrete without something to hold it up, such as pot feet, it will not drain well, because how can the water get through that hole and into the cement? So you have to lift your pots and keep them off the ground. It doesn't have to be high, inch, half inch, inch and a half, 2 inches. And you have to use the proper planting mix. When you go to the garden center now, all of the bags contain generally artificial soil, and it's primarily peat moss with sometimes a little humus, sometimes a little perlite or other ingredients. And generally speaking, all that does is hold the plant in place because it's sterile. So you can't dig soil up in your garden and use it. You have to use the proper planting mix. So design essentials. Excuse me, we talked about this. You can have a single item. It makes a lovely container. You can use a thriller, filler, or spiller. But you must remember that you're going to have to fertilize, fertilize, and fertilize. You buy a bag of soil, it may say it feeds for 3 months. But remember, when you water constantly, you're draining it constantly. And that's a slow release fertilizer. It's very minute. It comes out very, very slowly. So I suggest that you use a liquid fertilizer as well. So let's talk about fertilizers. Fertilize, what do the numbers mean? If you, every container, whether it be a bag, a bottle, or what, a tube, whatever, they all list NPK. Nitrogen. Nitrogen produces green growth. It's good for a lot of leaves. So if you use a fertilizer that's high in nitrogen on your tomato plants, you're going to get giant tomato plant, but no tomatoes. So phosphorus makes flowers or fruit. That's the middle number. It's always the middle number. And potash helps to make roots. So think about the fertilizer that you're going to use. Slow release granules that dissolve over time. They give a constant feed over 3 months, but very, very minute. And the fertilizer that's in there is going to last 3 months. But you must use a water soluble, and that washes away with the rain or when water is applied. And you have to apply that once a week. Now, water soluble comes from many different manufacturers. You can buy it in powder form. You can buy it pre-mixed in liquid form. So follow the manufacturer's directions. Just don't willy-nilly, you must follow the directions and do it once a week. You will be very well rewarded. Now, brands. Osmocote makes one for flowers and vegetables. It's called 14, 14, 14. Remember the numbers. And one's for indoor and outdoor. Well, this is just if you're going to have leaves. For instance, ivy. You want a lot of ivy and you want good roots, but the middle number doesn't count. Miracle Grow makes one for tomatoes and roses, and just make sure that the first number is not the highest when you're growing fruits and vegetables. Flowers and vegetables, an even number, 14, 14, 14, 20, 20, 20. Just buy a fertilizer that will give you what you're looking for, okay? But, oh, now come back. Okay, does anybody have any questions at this point?
So again, if anyone has any questions, you can put your questions in the chat at this point in time. Janet, I do have a couple of questions already waiting in the chat. I'll start reading them out loud to you. James, can you reuse the soil in your pots before you need to replace the soil?
Pardon me?
The first question is, how many times can you reuse the soil in your pots before you need to replace?
You can reuse the soil. Okay. You can reuse the soil if you amend it. In other words, let's say you bought a bag of soil last year and you grew in it all year long. And now you're ready and you want to use that soil again. You can probably use that soil again, but you should take it out and put some amendments in it. If you have some compost, mix some compost in it. You would have to put in more slow release fertilizer and mix that in and loosen it up. 2 years max, maybe. And then after that, I would not recommend unless you're going to add a lot of compost to it. And at that point, see, compost is very, very dense and there's not a lot of air. And plants need almost as much air as they need food and fertilizer. So by using the leftover soil, which is very loose, and adding compost, you're just adding more nutrition to the soil. Okay? Does that answer your question?
Yes, and the next question is also about soil. Which potting soil brands do you recommend buying?
Okay. As a master gardener, I'm not supposed to mention brands particularly, but I do have a question. If you're going to be planting annuals, you can use any of the prepackaged soils that are available, depending upon what your money can buy. There's so many kinds to choose from. It's like saying, what kind of car should I buy? So you can't go wrong by buying any of them, but that's for annuals. If you're trying to plant, let's say somebody gave you an azalea for Easter and you want to put it in a pot, you live in an apartment and you have a terrace and you know, what can you do? You must use a bark-based mix. You cannot use a peat moss-based mix. And it tells you right on the pack, on the back of every container. A bag will tell you what's in there. So a bark-based mix has better drainage, it's better air, and it allows the air and the moisture to go through the pot. When you have peat moss, it's dense. It stays wet all winter and you'll rot the roots. I'm primarily a shade garden, and I'm a hostaholic, and I have lost, I can't tell you how many hostas in pots. So this past year, when the deer came, I said, I'm done. I dug up all the hostas and I'm putting them in pots, large plastic pots in the garden, some of them 2 and 3 feet across. And I'm using a mixture of 2 ingredients. I'm using bumper crop, which is a soil additive that you can get at some garden centers. Not everyone carries it. So equal amounts of bumper crop and cedar chips, which is a mulch. So I use equal amounts, I mix it up and I put it in. So if you're growing, you got, as I say, you got an azalea for Christmas, for Easter, you can't put that in a regular pot. You have to use a bark-based mix. And of course, if you have an azalea, you're not going to fertilize it every week. I'm talking about fertilizing annuals every week, not perennials and not shrubs. Another question?
The next question on the list, what are the best fruits and vegetables to grow in pots?
You can grow tomatoes in pots. You just have to be selective as to the kind of tomato plant that you buy. There's a tomato plant that was started maybe 30 years ago, when we're called a patio tomato. So it stays short. You're not going to get big giant tomatoes, but it's bred to produce fruit on a more short structured tree. There are cherry tomatoes. There are, depending upon what you want to grow, I don't know of any fruit that you cannot grow in a pot. I have friends who grow peppers, eggplant, onions. They don't grow potatoes in a pot, okay? But mixed lettuces are wonderful in a pot. You know, you need a nice sized container, because if your pot's too small, you're going to have to water, and you don't want to spend all of your time. So make sure that your pot or your container is large enough, I'm recommending that you 16 inches across minimum. And that also comes with quite deep. So if you want to set, if you know that your plant that you're planting is not extremely deep rooted, you can save some money by using used water bottles with the caps on that are empty. Put a few of those in the bottom of the container and it'll use less soil. And it's a way to recycle those bottles. Okay. Any other question?
Yes, thank you. The next question. Can you grow root vegetables such as carrots if you find a big enough pot?
It's the depth of the pot that's going to be important, not the width of the pot. So if you wanted to grow, for instance, the root vegetables, I don't know if you're familiar with what a chimney liner is. It's about an 8-inch square and they're about 3 feet tall. You could grow a few carrots, turnips, or parsnips in something. You could probably grow them in a container, but don't forget, it has to be much larger, much deeper than what you're trying to grow. So if you want to grow carrots, and carrots are going to be 6 inches, you need a pot that's considerably deeper than that. Okay. Does that answer the question? Good.
The next question. What is the best light for growing veggies?
To grow what?
For growing vegetables.
To grow
what is the best
veggies,
light?
you must have sun to grow veggies. Any vegetable requires a minimum of at least 6 to 8 hours of direct sun on that pot. If you don't have that much sun, you can grow microgreens, you can lettuces, you can do leafy things. And leafy things you can start almost growing now, okay? You need to have, can't grow vegetables in my garden. I don't have enough sun. And they're not my trees, they're my neighbor's trees. So if you're building, if you have a patio or a terrace that faces north, there's not much you're going to grow on that, okay? Except maybe Coleus or shade-loving plants. I don't know of any vegetable that you will be successful with on the north side of a building. If you're on the south side of the building, you can grow almost any vegetable. East and west. East gets early morning sun. If you're living in a high rise and there's a building not far from you, the sun is only going to be on your deck or your patio for a short amount of time. It's going to be light, but it needs the rays of the sun, not just the light. That's why a home gardener has trouble starting seeds in their window, for instance. It doesn't work that way. So remember that you need full sun, okay? Next question.
And just as a follow-up question from me, how about flowers? Do
I'm
flowers
sorry.
need less sun? How about flowers? Do flowers need less sun?
Well, flowers, the same thing goes with most flowers, okay? Annual flowers, impatiens will grow with good light. They do not have to have the sun shining on them, okay? Mental block. It'll come to me in a minute. There are a number of plants that you can grow with indirect light, meaning that the sun doesn't have to shine on the pot, but it needs to be bright. Nothing's going to grow under a deck in that kind of shade, but you need to have good light. So impatiens, begonias, coleus, Calladiums, they all perform well in a shaded area. They all would like to have more light, the better. As far as sun is concerned, oh my goodness, anything you can grow in the sun.
Okay, the next question. What are your suggestions for container gardening in fall or winter?
Well, I have to say for the fall, I do like asters. Mums are short-lived, and that depends if you have a deer problem or not. Okay, I don't know in North Bergen. I don't think you have deer problems in North Bergen, but I'm not sure. So because when I first moved where I am now in Wyckoff, I didn't have a deer problem either. And now the herd has gotten totally out of control, even though I spray on a regular basis. So for the fall, there are wonderful grasses that you can put in the summer, and they'll mature and last to the first frost, and then they're finished. You can make an arrangement with, oh gosh, I'm trying to think of the name of it. Looks like punks. Oh my gosh. Off the top of my head, I cannot tell you another. Asters, chrysanthemums. I don't recall a lot. Winter, there's nothing going to grow in a pot in the winter. You can have a shrub, an evergreen shrub in a pot. It will not grow in the winter, but you have to protect it from the winter winds and make sure that you're using the right container, the soil in your container. Now, I have a lot of containers in my garden, and I hate to see them empty in the winter. So I go around and I pick evergreen branches and I put them in, and I do this relatively early, way before Thanksgiving, maybe around Halloween time. And just last week, I took them out of my window box because they stayed green all winter. So by using cut evergreens for the winter in a container, it makes your container much more attractive. But nothing grows in the winter. Okay, if you have a small Alberta spruce, just make sure that it's watered really well before the winter starts. I grow perennials in some of my containers. And what I have the hostas in the containers. And what I do now is after the first frost and the ground is cold and about to freeze, I turn my pots on their side. And by doing that, I avoid crown rot. The moisture does not collect on the top of the pot, freeze, and then start to thaw and then refreeze again. So by turning it on its side, it sheds the water and it's fine for the winter.
Thank you. The next question on the list. What are the best flowers to plant in your window boxes to attract butterflies?
For butterflies, in the window box. I think, well, that I really don't know, because first of all, I don't have sun, so I'm not familiar with what butterflies will go to any flower that has pollen. So if you have anything, the new hybrids, for instance, they're so full that the seed heads, the pollen can't come out for the insects to get it. So something flat, daisies, for instance, Gaillardia, but that's too big for a window box. Impatiens. I'm not going to say that it's going to attract butterflies. Most of the things that I'm aware of that attract butterflies are more shrub-like, and that's not going to work in a window box. So I can't help you with that one. Sorry.
Fair enough. The next question. How often do you need to water a container garden? Can you rely on rainfall like with an outdoor
No.
garden?
No, you cannot rely on rainfall. You must water your container depending upon the size. Okay, if it's a small 10-inch pot, you may have to water that every 2 days. If it's a 12 or 14, 16-inch pot, you may have to water it once a week. That's pushing it. I would say that the more you water, you can't overwater a pot if it has drainage. Okay, the containers, I would say that you have to water your containers a minimum of every 3 days. There is a product that you can use. It's a liquid, it's a polymer. You can mix that in. It's called, it'll come to me, I'm sorry. Soil moist. Follow the directions on soil moist. If it says use a tablespoon to a certain size pot, make sure that's all you use. Because if you use a cup, that they swell and they expand and they hold water. Soil moist is a really great aid if you don't want to water your pots all the time. But just remember that when you plant a plant in a container, if it's in the sun, you're going to have to water every, depending upon the size of the pot, every few days. If it's in the shade, you can get away with maybe once a week. And the best way to tell that is to go over and feel the soil in the pot. It'll feel dry. It's time to water. And it's time to fertilize. I fertilize almost every time I water with half strength. So if it says to put a tablespoon in a quart of water, I use maybe a teaspoon in a quart of water, but I do it every time I water, so it builds up. Okay.
The next question. The vegetables in my container garden never seem to grow very large. I have never fertilized them. Is that what I am doing wrong?
You have never what with them?
Fertilized. It says.
Oh, you have to fertilize. Now, if you're growing vegetables, you might want to add compost to the soil in your container. And you want to make sure that it's getting the correct amount of sun. If it's not getting 8 to 10 hours, you're not going to get the same size vegetable that if it's only 6 to 8 hours, you're not going to get the same size vegetable as someone who has 8 to 10 hours of sun. So the plants require good sun, good, not just light, but good sun. They have to have sun on them, and water and food. Those are the 3 essentials. So it's the light, the food, and the water. And if it lacks in any one of those, your plant is not going to be everything it could be. But any plant, whether it be in the ground or in a pot, to grow to be everything that it could possibly be, and to grow to its optimum, it needs the correct amount of air, food, and water. Those are the 3 essentials.
Thank you. The next question on the list. Which plants are best for shade gardening?
I'm a shade gardener. So I love begonias. I like fuchsia. There are many different kinds of fuchsia. There are upright fuchsia, there are hanging fuchsias, there are ivy. There are innumerable plants for shade. If you go to a good garden center, they will probably have all of the plants for shade underneath a lath. In other words, they'll have them protected. And you know that all the plants in that area will be good for in the shade. Now, remember, some of the plants will grow in the shade, but they won't flower in the shade. And I encourage everybody to think about leaves. If it doesn't have pretty leaves, You have to think about what a plant might look like when it's not flowering, especially the perennials. If you're going to buy a perennial, you had better love the leaves first, because you're going to look at the flower of a perennial maybe a month, and that's it. The rest of the time you're going to be looking at leaves. So love the leaves first. And if you're dealing with perennials and you want to make an arrangement, plant something with a thin leaf next to something with a fat leaf, because the thin leaf will look thinner and the fat leaf will look fatter, and they play off one another. And it's the contrast of the two. So you want to have, in any container, you want to be able to have texture. You want different size leaves as well as the flowers. The flowers are a bonus. If you have nothing but just flowers on the top and you can't see any of the leaves, it's not going to be as interesting as if you had some leaves in the container.
Right, and I feel like you already answered this earlier, but how about fruits and vegetables for shade gardening?
None. I don't know of any you might try some lettuces, but there's no fruit or vegetable other than maybe some lettuces that will grow in the shade. And then define shade. I have 3 hours of sun, and as the sun moves in my garden, 3 hours, 3 hours, 3 hours, I can't grow any vegetables in my yard. I would love to, but I can't. You know, there's some things it's just not going to work. So if you have shade and you want to grow something, I would say some lettuces that you pick early, like leaf lettuce, because it's never going to make a head. Okay.
Okay, and the final question that I have in the chat box: what are your favorite flowers for pots?
Oh, that's like saying, what is your favorite children? I visit the nurseries like now. It's really too early to put an annual outside other than pansies or petunias because it's too cold. So you have to wait until at least May 15th. The average frost-free date for Bergen County is May 15th. Now, to get an average, that's sometimes it's earlier, sometimes it's later. Some people say May 1st, and then I've been outside on May 8th running around trying to protect my plants. So go to various garden centers and look around and see what's available, and go now, so that when you walk into the garden center, you're not overwhelmed and by the first thing that you see and come home and plant it. And they're like, I've already visited 3 garden centers just to see what's there, so I can make an informed choice later on. I've made some notes. I want to use, because I'm shady, I want to use Garden Meister fuchsia. And I want that growing upright. The hummingbirds like it. And I want to plant with it. That's going to be my my thriller, okay? And I don't have a spiller yet, but I'm sorry, I don't have a filler yet, but my spiller is a plant called Iboza, I-B-O-Z-A. It's we all know vinca vine, that, you know, the vinca vine that you put in, it just grows over and it's just skinny. It has no oomph to it. So there are so many nice plants out there. Iboza will give you multicolor. It's green with a white border. For the shade now I'm talking. If you're in the sun, sweet potato vine. But trying to think, what else am I putting in? Oh, I visited a garden center the other day that has pre-planted container. It looks like about the size of a pie plate, maybe 14 inches. And it's already planted up. And it's $25. I could not buy the plants that are in there for $25. And they're all arranged beautifully. So then I take that home and I put that in my container and I'm done. It had begonia it had a number of different leaf textures in it because I'm into leaves. I'm not into flowers as much as I am leaves. It was just a peperonia, I believe, was in there. So just go visit the garden centers, look at magazines. If you have access to a computer, go to White Flower Farm and just look at their containers and get ideas from them and how they put them together. Better Homes and Gardens, all the gardening magazines have suggested things, but you should put in your garden what you like. Okay. And it depends what your pocketbook is. Containers are not cheap anymore. So you can buy a pack of plants where there's 4 or 6 plants in a pack, somewhere around $3. So you're getting 6 plants. Of course, they're small, as opposed to 1 plant for $6. And bring them, depending upon, what your budget is.
And I do have one more question that's snuck into the chat. What month do you recommend starting your garden?
I garden year round. I have to be honest. I'm a gardener. I love what I do. When you say start your garden, what are you starting? You're going to start a vegetable garden. You start planting pea seeds in February, but you can't plant your tomato plants outside until May 15th. So, to start a garden means to select plant material that will be compatible with one another. I'm going to open my garden to anyone who would like to come on, I have the date. I'm bad with numbers. I don't remember numbers. It's on a weekday. I'm doing it on a weekday. On May 18th, I'm opening my garden to all the libraries, garden clubs, or anyone who wants to come. My address, if you want to jot it down, is 16 Colonial Drive in Wyckoff. Now, I know that sounds like a trip from North Bergen, but it's not that bad. Come up 17, I guess, is the way you would come. I live in Wyckoff, which is just north of Paramus. I'm open from 10 in the morning to 4 in the afternoon. And I've done it on a weekday because I'm afraid of being inundated on a weekend. So it's rain or shine. So come on up and I can answer some of your questions as we walk around at that point. When I started my garden, when we bought this piece of property, there was a wall in the back. And I just followed the wall 18 inches out, and I put in a strip of plants. I started with hostas and fern because I'm shady. As years went on, I wanted to be able to walk through the garden. So I extended the beds and made them different shapes. So the beds became wider in areas and narrower in others. And the best way to do that is to use a garden hose. Take a garden hose and lay it on the ground on your grass and say, oh, this really looks nice. No, it's too fat over here. It's too skinny over here. And I now have very little grass compared to the amount of gardens that I have. So my first thing to bloom in the garden right now, I have hellebores. Hellebores are a wonderful plant in the shade. They will take some sun, and being in northern New Jersey, the deer don't touch them, so which is a really good thing. They start blooming as early as March, so they're blooming March, April, and they keep blooming for months. And when they're finished, there are other things that come up and bloom after them. So I don't grow that. The only thing I'm growing in containers now, I'm looking outside of one really large container with 5 miniature hostas of different colors scattered in that. But then I have probably 50, maybe 55 very large pots that have hostas that I dug up and moved from the front to the back because I have a deer fence. Having a deer fence doesn't mean that they don't get in. The other day, walking in the garden, I actually found a deer antler. Of course, it was from a little deer, but still they get in. So I have tulips that are starting to bloom now. I have daffodils. Daffodils are, well, all of the bulbs, tulips and daffodils, they have a longer season. There are some that bloom very early, and then there are some that bloom 2 weeks later than those, and some that bloom 2 weeks after that. So they call it early, mid, and late. But that's for the tulip season or the daffodil season, not for the summer, okay? And you start with spring bulbs, you know, like they're the harbinger of spring. Oh my God, I look out the window and every day there's something different. So when you start your garden, I start pots. I have some growing seeds in my basement as we speak, so that when May 15th comes, I can take the plants and put them outside. I generally don't grow from seed. I just think it doesn't pay. On the other hand, I have a light setup. You have to grow under lights. You can't grow on a windowsill because sun rays do not bend. They come straight. And unless the sun rays are coming in that window, not the light, but the rays of the sun, there's a difference, okay? If the rays are not coming in, that plant is going to get long and lanky, and it's not going to be all that it can be. And if you start out with something like that, they never really recoup. So I've always been one to buy plants at the garden center in containers to plant outside later on. But things are getting a little bit, so much more expensive than I anticipated. So I thought, well, I'll buy 2 packages of seeds. I paid $9 for 4 packages of seeds. If I get 4 plants, just 4 plants, I'm ahead of the game. So I hope to get much more than 4, but we'll see, you know. So I hope I've answered your questions. Yeah.
Yes.
Do you have any more?
You.
Okay.
That was the last question in the chat.
Okay.
So everyone knows, I did put Janet's address in the chat box, so you'll know where she lives. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say you're all welcome to come. I like to have people in the garden because this is what gardeners do. We share, you know, we share our knowledge. We make friends. My world is my garden. That's, you know, everybody has their thing. That's my passion. So please come and visit.
Perfect.
Okay?
Thank you for the invitation, Janet.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
I want to say a big thank you to everyone who came out tonight and spent time at the presentation. And I want to say a big thank you to you too, Janet, for volunteering to spend your time with us this evening.
It was a pleasure. It was a pleasure. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a very good night.
Okay. You too. Bye now.
Bye-bye.